So I'm delighted to welcome Sir Jeremy Hunt to the Business of AI podcast. And it's really an honour to be able to sit down with you today and discuss your book. There's so many things I'm really keen to ask you about this, because actually you've got such a lot of experience through government, through an incredible career in so many of those roles, right at the heart of it. And in this book, you've peppered through some great anecdotes there, but also really sort of given us a vision for what Britain can lead in. And I think it's really important, particularly at the moment, because there's a lot of pessimism, there's a lot of negativity at the moment around Britain. And then on the other side, there's also quite a bit of this jingoism as well. And I think it's really important that we find a middle ground, which I think you've actually done really well in this book and given us optimism for actually what the UK can lead in. Now, naturally, we're going to look at this through, as UKAI, as the Trade Association for AI, we're going to look at this through the lens a little bit of tech. So some of the questions I think towards the end we'll touch upon that, and a number of the chapters mention tech, in particular one, could the UK be the next Silicon Valley? But I want to really also kind of get into some of your deeper experience, particularly as Chancellor, where you really understood how the money works fundamentally. That seems to be the key, and you mentioned it in quite a few of the chapters, that's the key to making things happen. But of course your experience as Health Secretary as well. So first of all, I wondered whether we could just get started with, when you were thinking about writing this book, how did you perceive the UK, and how has that perception changed over the last couple of years?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is basically the book that I wish I'd been given the day I became Foreign Secretary. And I have to say, it is an out-of-body experience to become our Foreign Secretary, more than any other job that you get given in government, because you go into this room that is your office, and it is the grandest office in Whitehall. It's about 3 times bigger than the Prime Minister's office. Wonderful oak-panelled walls. It's like working in a sort of corner of the British Museum, and there in the far corner is your desk, and you think, bloody hell, is this my office? And it's all designed to impress Johnny Foreigner, and every single Foreign Secretary, and I'm sure it's exactly the same for Yvette Cooper when she was appointed a few weeks ago, the same thought goes through your mind. Is this just an imperial delusion? Are we kidding ourselves? Or are we really a great country? And my definition of great, by the way, I don't think Donald Trump should have a monopoly on the word great. It's quite a MAGA sounding title, but my definition of great is very simple. It's a country that can shape the world as well as be shaped by it. And so when I stepped down, I thought, right, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And I took the 7 or 8 biggest issues facing the world today: European security, AI, climate change, the future of democracy, future of human rights, how to stop a pandemic. And I looked at what the independent experts say about Britain's influence, and in every single case, they said that out of 193 countries in the United Nations, we are easily in the top 10 most influential countries. And so and we can go through why it is, but in Europe we have the most respected military, the best universities, the biggest tech sector, more soft power, more hard power than anyone in Europe. But this is not a jingoistic book. I would make exactly the same argument to an audience of French or Germans or Aussies or Americans. My argument is, it is so dangerous right now in the world that the worst thing any country can do is underestimate its own influence, which is what we're doing in the UK. There's been so much doom and gloom, and it's hard, to read any newspapers without feeling thoroughly depressed. But actually, countries that have influence need to roll up their sleeves and sort out these problems. And this is really a cri de coeur for Keir Starmer and whoever is running these countries, our country, but also other countries that share our values, to get stuck in and try and solve these big problems.
Thank you, and that comes through, that sort of that passion for trying to understand what makes the UK unique comes through in the book. Could I ask about the sort of the tech side of thing as well? Because one of the themes in your book is around the opportunity that the UK has to lead in tech, and you've seen this firsthand in the health sector in particular. What led you to have that chapter around whether the UK could be the next Silicon Valley? And could you unpack that a little bit and sort of give us some background on what you think the opportunity is?
Well, I've always been a real enthusiast for our tech sector, and I was a tech entrepreneur myself. Sadly, it wasn't a unicorn, and I sold out long before I could make any vast sums of money. But I always been interested in our tech sector, and I discovered when I became Chancellor that we now have the third largest tech ecosystem in the world after the US and China. And in 2021, we became only the third in the world to be worth more than $1 trillion. And it's a rather extraordinary tech sector. We don't talk about it very much because there aren't very many British tech names. That's something, by the way, we need to sort out. But it has the most incredible breadth, from life sciences to deep tech, from creative industries to gaming. And that makes it very special. And in my first autumn statement in November 22, which you may remember was a pretty horrible moment, I had to put up taxes, cut spending, do lots of pretty horrible things. I wanted to give people a bit of hope. So I decided to take a risk, and I said in that speech in the House of Commons, our aim as a country should be to be the world's next Silicon Valley. And I was fully expecting to be ridiculed, in this really bad moment. We'd had the mini budget, we'd had so many things that had gone wrong, COVID, energy prices through the roof. And no one laughed. They really didn't. And so I thought, why is this? And I realized that people understand that we've got some things going for us. We've got outside the US, the world's most respected universities. Outside the US, the world's biggest financial services sector. We've got the London, Oxford, Cambridge triangle. Our universities now have spin-offs and science parks and tech parks that are every bit as good as what happens at Stanford and the Ivy Leagues. And so there is something very exciting happening here, and we're not there yet at all. There's lots of things we need to sort out. But I do think this is our big opportunity. And if you said to me fundamentally, why am I optimistic for the country? It is because I think the sectors that are going to grow the most this century, particularly AI, but also sadly defence because of what's happening in European security, are sectors the UK is very strong in.
So that's interesting to hear the opportunities, and thank you for reminding us of the way that's been sort of developing. Where do you think we are now, and what can the government do? Because I think there's definitely an opportunity out there, but the frustration maybe that some entrepreneurs feel, and you can relate to this having been an entrepreneur, is that the government doesn't always have the right levers to be able to help or to do it quick enough. And I don't mean to make this too political, but I'm just fascinated by your insights because you've been there and you've been thinking about these policies. What do you think the government should be doing more of to help to make the UK a Silicon Valley?
Well, I think there's two things. And by the way, there's a lot of common ground between me and Rachel Reeves. I think she's identified digital and tech as one of our key growth sectors. And so I don't think she would disagree with what I'm about to say. But I think, if we're going to make that leap to be the world's next Silicon Valley, then we've got to create an infrastructure where homegrown companies can IPO in the UK without having to go to NASDAQ or wherever they choose to go to once they, hit unicorn status and want to go public. And the reason that doesn't happen, there are lots of different reasons, but the main reason is because in the US and in Canada and in Australia, if you do an IPO, you can be pretty confident that pension funds, domestic pension funds, will pour in and want to take that stock. Whereas UK pension funds tend to invest everywhere but the UK. In fact, less than 4% of their holdings are UK based. And this is for all sorts of reasons. And it's why I did the Mansion House reforms, and Rachel Reeves has built on those. And we've got to take that a lot further. I mean, we have this ridiculous situation at the moment where British venture capital funds investing in British growth tech businesses get about 45% of their funding from North American pension funds and 3% of their funding from British pension funds. So actually, North Americans are making more money out of our great hopes for the future than Brits are, and it's nuts. And we need to. There's lots of things we could do to sort that out. But if I could change the Australian pension system for the one we have in the UK overnight, I would do that in a shot, because it's really good. And for savers, they get an average of 1.6% better returns every year. So over a 40-year life of saving, working life, if you do the maths because of compound interest, basically an Aussie pension pot will be double the size of a Brit pension pot if that was compounded over 40 years. So, and that's, partly because they invest so much more smartly and aggressively in really high growth businesses. The second area is energy cost. We have the highest energy costs in Europe. The data centers are very important for the future of AI. The energy used by data centers will be more than the entire amount of energy used by the Indian economy by 2034. So India is the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world, and we will be using more electricity in data centers than the whole of India in less than a decade. And we have got to sort out our energy prices. They're just too high. And that's something that Jensen Huang talked about actually when he came to the UK for the Trump state visit.
Yeah, it's of critical importance. We've got a number of members who are data centers, and it's the burning issue for them as they look at how to make sure that they can continue to invest in the UK and to make a profitable business that's then going to be able to serve the rest of the AI industry that's based upon those data centers. So I think you're absolutely right there. It also has an impact upon consumers, of course. In terms of the procurement, though, as well, because that's another element that is a way the government can help here. And I wanted to maybe sort of look at the health sector in particular, because a number of our members have technologies that have an application within health. So whether it be diagnostics or predictions or drug discovery, they're using different types of machine learning or data science within those sectors. Often the challenge they have, though, is that they find it hard to get adoption, to get engagement, because the procurement process in government is so hard. From your time as Health Secretary, I mean, do you have any advice or any ideas on how to smooth and to accelerate the adoption of technology in the health sector?
It's a really big issue, and frankly, there's a structural flaw in the NHS. Which, if we addressed, would not just solve that issue, but it would solve lots of other issues. And that is that the NHS is the biggest healthcare system in the world. It is also the most centralized and the most micromanaged. And it's got so many targets that Stalin would be proud if he was alive today. And hospitals have 18 monthly operational targets. And the result of that is you have a system where everyone is looking over their shoulder to their manager at NHS England or to ministers. And, instead of delegating down power, which is what successful large organizations do, everything is delegated up to ministers. And that's why it's really difficult for a small company to get a hearing, because, no minister really has the capacity to get under the skin of some of this really exciting technology. And so what we need to do, which would mean the NHS became much more innovative and much more, it gave much better quality of care and much shorter waiting lists, is to decentralize it, as we do in the school sector, where English state schools have in the last couple of decades become the best state schools in the Western world, the highest reading standards, some of the highest math standards. They are brilliant, but we've done that because we basically delegate power to heads. We give them the budgets. We say, you got Ofsted, we're going to publish your exam results, but apart from that, it's up to you. And there's a huge amount of innovation. And I don't know the last time you went around one of our state schools, but there is not waste in those state schools either. They're careful with every penny. And the mentality is very, very impressive. And so that's why procurement is so grindingly difficult. So I was the longest serving health secretary. And if I had my time again, I would have scrapped all those national targets. I did reduce them. And when I was Chancellor, I persuaded NHS England to halve them again. So I think I'd made some progress, but it's just become too cumbersome and bureaucratic.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful to hear, and I think it reflects some of the challenges which those businesses have faced, which is it's very hard to know who to deal with. It's often very fragmented to 225 plus NHS trusts to try and engage with. I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of responsible industry. What does that look like? If the UK is to try and lead in the world, it used to be positioned as you can either follow the US or you can follow the EU model, particularly in terms of AI and technology and regulation. You've got the EU AI Act on one side, you've got the US on the other side, they're quite laissez-faire, and the UK has to choose. I'm starting to sense now, though, that the UK is getting more confidence in being able to set out its own vision based upon the principles. And this is one of the arguments in your book, I think, as well, where you're saying that actually that we should be confident enough to be able to lead rather than following. But I wanted to get your perspective on what that looks like. What do you think are those important principles that the UK has that we could feed into a responsible AI industry?
Well, it's a really topical question. I mean, broadly, if we were going to choose between those two models, I would veer towards the US approach, which is minimize regulation, but be prepared to clear up the mess if there is one, rather than the EU approach, which is kind of regulate to death against every possible thing that might happen, which seems to me absolutely crazy if the other thing you hear from the Commission is, why don't we have any European Googles or European Microsofts? Well, you're never going to get European Google or Microsoft if you have this kind of heavy-handed regulation that they have embraced in the EU. But I think in the UK, we don't always get it right, but we thought very hard about regulation and transparency. We are seeing in the US under Trump the politicization of a lot of regulation, which I don't think is a good idea. I think it's really important that regulators are able to operate independently. But I think we also are quite pragmatic. So we've done things which are regulatory, which I'm really proud of. I have kids of 11, 13, 15, and I think it's a great thing that we have age verification on pornography. And I remember when I was Culture Secretary in 2010, responsible for the tech sector as the Culture Secretary was in those days, and we were all told this is never going to happen. And you're just going to have to accept that it's going to be the Wild West for kids using the internet. And we've addressed that issue. As a father, I would say the next issue which I feel we need to address is the addictive nature of doom scrolling and on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And I do find it spooky that I can give my kids their iPad and they're literally kind of zoned out for 2 or 3 hours and I just don't see them. And of course it's very attractive childcare on one level, but it's actually not good for them. And so I think we can sort that out. And I think you were beginning to see the tech companies respond to parental concerns. But what I don't think you can do with AI is predict which direction it's going to go. So, there's a lot, when you listen to, Sam Altman or Demis Hassabis or Mustafa Solomon at the moment, they're saying the next big frontier is, will AI, what happens when we have AI with consciousness? What happens when we have autonomous AI? And I think the truth is, we just don't know whether that is something that's going to be scary or a bit fun. It could be that having an AI robot in the home of a 90-year-old lady who's living on her own is actually just a brilliant thing. It's kind of company. She knows it's a computer, but it does all sorts of things that she wouldn't be able to do on her own. It keeps her independent for longer. And it's kind of fun and harmless. It's a new part of life, and it could be something that's really spooky and starts to control her. And that's what the dystopian scenario is. I'm personally more on the optimistic side. I think that human beings are not computers. I don't believe that we are stochastic parrots, to use the phrase that Professor Emily Bender has used. And I think we will always be able to distinguish between computers and human beings because we are inherently different. And maybe I'm going to have to eat my words if you invite me back in 5 years' time, but I would much rather listen to a Rachmaninoff symphony than a symphony that an AI has composed in the style of Rachmaninoff. I just would. I just want to listen to something that's been done by a human being. I would not enjoy the AI symphony as much. But on the other hand, I'm absolutely delighted if ChatGPT makes my life quicker and more efficient and easier. So I'm on that side of things, but I might be wrong. And that's why I think the thing is to regulate as lightly as possible, but with our eyes open.
Thank you. You've touched upon so many important issues within that. Having teenage children as well, I absolutely agree that we need to take more responsibility for the technology because it is so powerful. And I feel that as a generation, we almost sleptwalked into where we are now with social media, because at the time it was fun, and it was really fun. But now we look back and we think, well, actually, maybe we should have been more, we should have thought more about the consequences, and we need to learn from that in terms of now for our children's generation. So I think there has to be that balance there. We have to learn from that. I think it was great that we were talking before about the stochastic parrot, which, just to explain for our audience, you explained to me that it was a prediction, the ability of parrots to predict. Do you want to just kind of explain that little anecdote?
Well, this is just the debate that's been happening in Silicon Valley, because Professor Emily Bender, who's a big expert and an AI skeptic, but knows her stuff, she described LLMs as stochastic parrots. I had to look up the meaning of the word stochastic, but it basically means doing something based on probability. And so she was basically saying LLMs just repeat back to you what the internet is saying based on the most probable answer to the question that you ask it to. So she described LLMs as stochastic parrots. And Sam Altman then, I think, said on X, I am a stochastic parrot, Emily, and so are you. Yeah. And in other words, that's all the human brain is as well. Yeah. Well, I don't buy that, actually. I think there is something different about the human brain and about humankind to computers. And so that's why I don't think we're going to end up being controlled by machines.
Yeah, well, I also look forward to inviting you back in 5 years' time to see how some of these
predictions
have panned out.
I'll send an AI of myself.
That's a very good idea. A digital twin. And then you'll be able to go out on all those, you were talking before about also all the book tools. You can send your digital twin out around the country to do some of those. One of the other themes which you touched upon also was the relationship with the US. And I know that, in your role as Foreign Secretary in particular, you've met with President Trump and with Kissinger and many other sort of world leaders. We saw just last week, 2 weeks ago, the tech partnership deal. The headline was 150 billion investment in the UK, which is great. It's one of the biggest investments of the US in any country. But it also touches upon some of those questions about responsibility. And on one side, what is the US hoping to get back from that investment? Does it mean that they want to have less regulation? Some of the things like the Online Safety Act, Digital Services Tax, copyright, those sorts of things. But also, what does it mean for our indigenous industry here in the UK that we're trying to build? And you've already mentioned the fact that we haven't seen the development of those UK companies yet. Do you think this investment, although on the face of it, it's good, actually the long-term consequences might not be as good?
Not at all. I mean, I don't at all buy the fact that this idea that we're just being brought up by US or the US. because we have the most extraordinary innovation coming out of spin-outs from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, Manchester, Edinburgh, and brilliant new ideas that are happening here. And we've got brilliant names like, Tim Berners-Lee and, Demis Hassabis and the guys at ARM, who are continuing to make an absolutely huge impact on the development of the internet and AI. But the way around this is, to make it easier for those brilliant emerging British companies to access the capital they need here so that they can develop into globally significant companies in the UK with UK funding. And that's the way to do it. It's not to shut out the innovation that's happening in the US. It is to just make it easier for people who want to get off the ground here. And I absolutely think that, when I was Chancellor, we changed the listing rules so that the London Stock Exchange is now pretty similar to NASDAQ. As a tech founder, you can keep control of your company when you list on the London Stock Exchange. That was criticised by some people, but that's very important if we're going to get tech founders to want to stay here. There's more that we need to do for sure, but I think that's the positive way of answering that question.
Thank you. Yeah. I wanted to come back to the book because there's many really interesting anecdotes and stories in there. One of the analogies you draw is around the role that defense played in the development of Silicon Valley. And I think it's really interesting to explore that, because actually, when a lot of people think about defense, they think about it as quite a negative thing. But in some ways, you could also argue, as I think you touch upon in your book, that it's a positive thing because it helps keep peace. And out of the money which is spent on defense, if it's channeled in the right way, it actually leads to a number of technological developments which can then help the UK to lead. So could you sort of help us understand a bit more that sort of opportunity that you see there for defense to be a catalyst for the tech sector in the UK?
Yes, look, the first thing is something that might have been controversial if I'd said it 10 years ago, but is, I think, not controversial now, and that is the importance of peace through strength. The biggest provocation to Vladimir Putin is if he thinks Europe is weak. I think personally that there was quite a strong connection between the abject failure of the Western withdrawal from Afghanistan and Kabul in 2020 under Biden and his decision to invade Ukraine the next year. It's not that he didn't want to do it anyway, but I think when he saw that weakness, I think he thought, maybe this is something I can get away with. And we have to recognize that if he doesn't think that we are strong, that there are plenty of other targets in Europe that he might consider, some of the smaller Baltic states. We've seen the drones in Denmark and so on. And so, that is the way we keep peace, is by recognizing that, we're not ever going to be an aggressor, but we need to be strong so that people don't think that they can push us around and get away with terrible acts. Now, in that context, it is really interesting that the original Silicon Valley took off because there was an arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States and a space race. And the Department of Defense and DARPA and NASA poured in money to the Stanford satellite companies. And under the dynamic leadership of this Stanford professor called Fred Terman, they built this extraordinary ecosystem. And so there was a big crossover between defense and technology in the early days. And given that we are a big spender on defense, we should think very carefully about the spin-off for our tech industry. And I think the crucial thing that we need to learn from the founding of the original Silicon Valley is that the US Department of Defense did not channel all those resources to the big primes, as they call them in the US. A lot of this money went to small startups with really interesting ideas. So I think for Rachel Reeves now, she's thinking about the tech opportunity here. The key thing is to make sure that the extra money we're now putting in defense doesn't just go to the great companies though they are, to the Rollses and the Babcocks and the BAEs, but actually goes to the extraordinary AI spin out in Imperial, where someone's got a piece of technology that maybe nothing to do with defence, but actually could be very useful for our guys on the front line.
Yeah, and that seems to be where some of the innovation is coming from those really sort of cutting edge university projects, which actually could do with a bit of help to kind of get them spun out into robotics, for example. I was talking to a founder of a robotic company about some of the autonomous drones which they're creating, and they need to be using artificial intelligence to operate behind enemy lines where the phone signal gets cut, or where the foreign enemy will try and interact with them to control them as well. So AI has a really incredible role to play there. Just in terms of kind of bringing things to a bit of a close, because although I'd love to ask you more questions about the book, we're sort of running a little bit out of time now. But I wanted to kind of understand what comes next after this, because I think at the end of the book, there's two things you do really nicely. You kind of allude to your next book, which I think might have a technology flavour. So I wanted to ask you about that, and also you have a sort of call to action to the Prime Minister, almost like this is what I think you should do. I wanted to ask you about that bit first, and so how has that changed? You wrote this probably 3 or 4 months ago. Has your advice changed, do you think, in terms of what you would say to Keir Starmer now in terms of what's happened with Trump and what's happened in the world?
No, I don't think so. It was quite nerve-wracking to publish a book. It came out in June, but obviously I had to finish writing it in April because of publishers' timelines. And it finishes with a letter to Keir Starmer. And, does it still stand the test of time? I think it does, actually. But I think the biggest thing I would say to him, and actually I'd say the same to Kemi Badenoch, is, when we think about technology, we need to understand how that's changing politics too. And, Donald Trump, whatever you think about his policies, is the best communicator in the world right now. And he is prepared to spend 2 to 3 hours a day on TV and social media. And he's constantly doing it. And when I was Chancellor, I used to do the media maybe once a fortnight, and I'd be carefully coached by a civil servant before going on. And once I'd done the media, I'd heave a sigh of relief for the next 2 weeks. Now, with great respect to our Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think the President of the United States is busier. And yet, the President managed to find 2 to 3 hours a day. And if you're asking yourself, why is that Donald Trump got re-elected against all the odds, all the things that are being thrown at him? It was because people were hearing from him. And, I'm not someone who says it's all about communication, it's not about substance. I think substance is a really important part of politics. But I think that traditional politicians, myself included, have failed to understand how to communicate in a social media world. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how to do 30-second videos now, because this seems to be where the whole thing is going. And I did a video last week, which is like saying that actually Rachel Reeves doesn't need to raise tax in the budget. She's got some alternatives. It's a party political point, but the interesting point I wanted to mention is, anyway, I couldn't quite get it into 30 seconds. It ended up, I think, being 51 seconds. But when I looked at the stats, the average time someone saw that video, it did okay, but the average time was 17 seconds. Yeah. So I really did need to cut it down. And that is, the new world that we're in, basically. And that's what we need to start understanding. If we want to win elections, we need to look at the guys who are winning elections and try and learn from them.
Yeah. No, and I think you gave the anecdote in your book where you were with Donald Trump's team, and you found that he didn't get up till midday or something, or he didn't start the office till midday, and you asked what he was doing, and then he was actually sort of online.
Yeah.
And you said he's the most in contact with the American people because of that. And that's actually what has given him that unique ability to both listen and communicate. So to your point, I mean, it's fascinating to think about what that could mean for British politics. I mean, would we have the time? Would politicians have the time to be able to spend 2 or 3 hours every morning? I mean, you've been in some of those key offices of state. Where would you find the time to be able to do that? Should it be prioritised?
It should, and it's totally your choice. I mean, when you are Prime Minister or Chancellor, you are in charge of your own diary. There's very few things that you have to do. I mean, Prime Minister's questions. There are a few moments in Parliament that are completely obligatory, but there'll be some foreign leaders that you have to meet, but there'll be some G7 meetings you have to go to. But basically, you are in charge of your own time. You can make those choices.
Fascinating. I've really enjoyed being able to put these questions to you. Thank you for expanding upon what is already in your book. And by the way, if you haven't yet had the chance to read through the book, I do recommend to the audience to grab Jeremy's book and read through it, because it's packed full of incredible anecdotes. You shared some of them with us today, thank you. But also some of your insights from being in those incredible roles and your sort of vision for the future. So just to close up, could you tell us about what's coming next? What's next for you?
Well, my next book, this is the book that I wish I'd been given the day I became Foreign Secretary. The next one is the book I wish I'd been given the day I became Chancellor. And it's basically about economic growth. And I'm trying to demonstrate in the book that unlocking British economic growth is a totally solvable problem. It can be done, because again, I think there's just a bit too much doom and gloom about our prospects. And I think there are a few things we could do that would be very transformative. And so hopefully it will be, also an encouraging book. Fantastic. And I'm hoping there'll be a big part of tech in that economic growth. Absolutely. There's a whole chapter on it, so don't worry. Incredible. Amazing. Well, Sir Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us on the Business of AI podcast. Thank you again. Pleasure.